Okay guys, today what we got is a hull wrecker. This is a grain mill for milling down your malt to make beer. So what this will do is it'll crack the grain a little bit. It doesn't grind the grain up fine into dust or powder. All it does is crack the grains, separates them from the hulls. Okay guys, I'm going to put the hull wrecker together. There's two different sides. The sides with the just a angle cut to them, and then there's a side with the little tabs on them. So you got to make sure you orient those properly. First thing I'm going to do is peel all this blue off. Protective. Okay, I've got all that blue plastic peeled off. So the next thing I'm going to do is bolt together the hopper. You've got two different plates. Two different styles of plate. There's this with a little lip flange on there, and then there's the other type here where it's got a notch cut out of it here. So this flange goes on the inside, and your larger one with the little lip, this goes on the outside like so, and then put all your little bolts in the holes. That's going to probably be the hardest part. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this one down like that, and I'm going to start one by putting a nut under there like that. You almost need another person to help you with it, and then I'm going to set that on top of there, and that should be an easier way to get the nuts and get everything bolted together. Okay guys, it's coming together, but it's kind of frustrating because the hardware is so small. So what I'm doing, I'm taking a magnet, if you get a magnet any kind, and then I'm taking the nut and putting it over the hole. I'm taking a screw, put it in there, and just using the magnet to sort of hold that nut there, because my fingers are too big to really hold it. And then I'm turning the screw just to get it started. Once you get it started, then you can take your fingers and hold on to the nuts. They give you some extra hardware, which is nice, just in case you lose some of it. So I've got two more to go. So they give you 4 extra screws with the lock nuts, which hopefully you will never need them, because I'd hate to see if one of these screws came loose and went through your mill, through these mill plates, the mill rollers. That would probably tear them up, especially if you're running a drill on this. So it's good. I don't know about the Chinese no-name brand mill like this, but this brand comes with lock nuts with a little nylon insert, so that's awesome. Alright guys, once you got all your nuts installed, come back with a 7/32 wrench and a screwdriver. That's the proper size for the little nuts. Tighten them all up. If you don't have a 7/32 little socket or wrench, you might want to try pliers or a little tiny crescent wrench or something. Okay, the next step, once you got all those screws tightened, put together, is to get your base, and I'm going to have the logo facing the same way as the hull wrecker logo, and you just slide it into the base. Make sure these nuts are loose on the inside. There's a Phillips head screw side here. Just loosen those nuts a little bit. I'm hanging out. Get your hopper put in there. It's a tight fit. Now push it down. And come back and tighten that screw there. And you can see the nut on the inside. There's a nut right there. Tighten that screw. Okay, the attachment point, these bolts here, these are not nylock nuts, and it's not a locking nut, so you may want to put a little Loctite on that just to make it nice and secure so it doesn't fall off into your hopper. Okay guys, when you put your base on, make sure the side with the crank handle, this side here, has the more narrow, smaller side, because that's going to go up against the edge of the bucket. And just put your 2 screws in. You'll need a 5mm Allen wrench. Tighten those down. They give you washers with them. These you might want to put a little Loctite on these too. Okay, they give you a little rubber piece to go on the top, so that gets rid of all the sharp edges. That's the next thing I'm going to put on here. Set that over the edge. I have to say that rubber edge on the top gives it a much more finished look. I know some of the cheaper brands, they do not have that rubber edge that goes on top. Just gives it a nice finished look. So there it is, all put together, except for, I'll have to put the crank on now. And that's just, there's a nut, a locking nut, and this is your screw to set it. So find that flat spot. I'm going to try it with the hand crank first. Then later I'm going to put a drill on here. It's made for, you can also use a drill. They recommend 500 RPM for the drill. So I'm going to tighten this up. And I'll lock that nut in place. And then we're going to try it out. Okay, we're going to test this whole wrecker out. What I've got here is some cheap grain that I feed to the chickens. It's scratch grains, so it has corn, oats, some rye. I think there may be wheat in there too. Not sure, but it's just straight grains. It has 4 grains in it. It should be a good test because the corn is already cracked, but I know corn is a little harder to grind up or crack. And since these don't have a husk on them, these other grains, the wheat and the oats, will grind a little finer. But first thing I'm gonna do is just run a little bit through the way it's set. It's set at 50 thousandths. I'm gonna pour that in there. And it may just pass right through. We'll see. See how that goes. It's got some resistance. I'm going to grind up a bunch, and we'll see how that compares to the unground stuff. It's not super hard to turn, but there's a little resistance to it. You have to hold it, keep it from rocking on you. I can hear it working. Okay, let's see what we got. Let's reach in here. yeah, it definitely ground it down a little bit. Seems like mostly the corn crushed. I'm looking at the wheat and the oats and the other whole grains that are in there, and they're slightly cracked. If you look real close there, they have little indentions in them, but they're not really broke up that much. So we're going to go finer on that. Okay, so I'm going to make an adjustment here now to the gap between the rollers. So I'm going to do, I'm going to unlock that lock and screw, turn this back a little bit, and same on the other side. Just back that locking adjustment out, and then I'm going to turn, this is the adjustment knob, I'm going to turn that adjustment knob about halfway. Right now it was set at 50. I don't know if you can see it because of the glare, but this is 50 if it's straight up, and then 25 thousandths is over there. So I'm just going to go halfway. And I'm going to tighten this down, and then I'm going to lock the adjustment in by tightening that nut. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So here we're going, a little more chicken feed. This is that 4-grain mix. I'll show you what the bag looks like. It's produced by scratch grains. Okay, if you guys are curious, I wouldn't recommend using that to make beer, but I'm using this to set up my my rollers, which it has bigger chunks of corn. Corn is cracked, but I think that's going to be the most resistance it's gonna come into is that. And I'm going to do the final setup with some barley. See how the corn chunks are a little bigger than the grain. So we're going to, this is just a fun little test we're going to do. We'll see how, I'd say we'd have more resistance on it this than this. Yep, definitely. It's quite a bit harder to turn. You really got to hold it tight to the bucket. And I'd say that's mostly that corn, but it is doing the job. You have to hold it pretty tight. Let's see what we're getting in the bucket now. This should be interesting. Oh yeah, that's definitely finer than it was last time. I got this bucket from last time. Look at that, guys. Can you see that? The corn is really crushed up to some small pieces. The grains, not so much. A little bit. The grains are mostly whole still. So most of the resistance I'm getting is off of the corn. So mainly what we're doing is grind cracked corn. So we're gonna, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna get some 2-roll malt, some malted barley. We're gonna crush that now. Just see how it works. Grind all this up. I'm going to feed it to the chickens. Alright, I've got my adjustments set on both sides, right to the middle here, between 50 and 25. Let's say it's at 35. We've got the 2-row malt of barley. Put it in there. We're going to give it a crank and we'll see how good it does at cracking those grains. Alright, here we go. It's not much resistance at all, really. I can still have to hold the hopper, but I could do this with just 2 fingers. Crank these grains through. Take a good look in there. Let's see what's coming out. See how it's coming out. Oh yeah. I can see already the grains cracked pretty good. I like it. Love the smell of that malt. The holes are broken off, and you can see the pieces are cracked down pretty good. They're not just broken in half. The grains are probably third, quarter, even finer than that. There's some dust in here. See, I'll take it out. See the dust? So I could probably back off the rollers a little bit so there isn't all that fine dust, because when you go to sparge, you don't want a lot of fine dust. That'll clog it up, and then the water won't pass through when you sparge it. But overall, that's pretty good. I could try it this way and see how difficult it is to sparge. That's not a bad setting. Okay guys, if you plan on using one of these hull wreckers to kind of grind your grains up for some sort of a mash, and you're going to plan on using these scratch grains, this has got cracked corn, wheat, barley, oats in there. I'd recommend starting a little loose on the dial. Set your dial to closer to 50 for the first pass. Just make 2 passes and then dial it down to maybe 35 or 37 or something like that, and then just go a little finer. You can even make 3 passes with it, because if you try to go from big chunks, this has some pretty big chunks of corn in it, you may end up damaging your hull wrecker. So, you know, make 2 passes with it. And I think if you get your grain down to something like this, you'll get a little better extract out of it. I could probably go a little finer, because I noticed some of the whole grains they're cracked. Like, let's say for instance this piece right here, you can see it's cracked in 2 different places, but still kind of whole. I could probably go a little finer. This I ground at about 37, so maybe start out at like, say, just under 50, and then dial it down to maybe 30, 35. Try that 2-step. But it does work good even with the corn. Just do it in 2 steps though.